the name of John Mangan, who's a professor of economics at the University of Queensland, gave some evidence to the committee earlier on this week. Now, he was commissioned by Anglicare to look into the argument that the pokies raise a lot of revenue for the government, they're good for the state and all that sort of stuff, and it might surprise you the results of what he's found out. To tell us a little bit more about it, it is the manager of Social Action and Research Centre at Anglicare, Meg Webb, who joins me now. Good afternoon, Meg.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good. Now, I guess one of the key things that came out of Professor Mangan's report is that he said that $113 million currently going into pokies. If we didn't have the pokies, that would be going somewhere else, into other local business perhaps.
Indeed. That's one of the things that Professor Mangan looked at in his study. He said, what would happen if we didn't have pokies in our local suburbs, and that $113 million a year that's currently spent in those pubs and clubs was spent elsewhere? And what he found was that would boost the Tasmanian economy. It would bring us about 670 new jobs, and it would boost our gross state product. So it would be a win for the Tassie economy. What we did, though, we asked him to model a couple of other scenarios too, because we thought, well, with reason, if we didn't have pokies in pubs and clubs, the current money that's spent in them, some of that might go to casinos where there still would be pokies. So we had him model a couple of scenarios where some of the money goes to casinos and then the rest goes out to the Tassie economy. And each scenario that he modelled still showed a benefit overall to Tassie's economy. So it's a win-win for Tassie. It's less social harm and good for the economy.
Well, the social harm you've touched on there, I mean, problem gambling, it's at a fairly high rate in Tasmania, isn't it? Of the number of gamblers that we have, the percentage of problem gamblers is probably higher than a lot of other states, I think.
Oh, look, it's one of those things that can be really hard to get good, firm evidence on. But what we know is that certainly the figure is too high. And when you start to talk to Tasmanians out in the community, what you hear again and again is personal stories of people who've had family members whose lives have been devastated by a poker machine addiction, people who have had neighbours or work colleagues whose lives have been devastated. It can be very difficult to know exactly how many people have a problem with poker machine gambling because it's something that has a lot of stigma and shame attached to it. So one thing we did do in recent times was do a poll here in Tassie, and we asked people in that poll of 1,000 people, do you personally know someone who has a problem with poker machine gambling? And what came back was that 1 in 3 Tasmanians personally know someone who has a problem with poker machine gambling. So I think that gives us an indication that the figure is too high and the harm is too great.
It tells me it's fairly widespread there. And I guess being involved with Anglicare, you'd see firsthand the impact of what problem gamblers can do.
Absolutely. Through our services, we see the fact that people begin gambling and it might be something that they at first can control. But we know from research that 1 in 6 people that regularly sit in front of a machine are going to become addicted. And for those people, it becomes a compulsion. It's a chemical addiction. So what they end up doing is using up all the money they had available, and then they're dipping into money that's not really available to them. And that begins to have an effect on their family. It begins to have an effect on their jobs, perhaps their housing. It may lead to criminal behaviour, and it often leads to very poor mental health and may even lead to suicide. Yeah. So that trajectory is absolutely tragic, and it's something that we can do things about.
You mentioned criminal behaviour too, and I think there's been a real upsurge in the number of fraud cases and people that have ripped off money from their employers. They've done it because they've got a gambling problem to fund that problem. So I think there's been a real increase there, and if we didn't have the machines, maybe we wouldn't have that sort of thing happening.
Yeah, look, I can't comment on actual figures to do with that. One of the problems is that in court cases it's not often documented or made as an official part of the case that it was related to problem gambling. So it can be hard for us to know through court cases and things if gambling was actually at the centre of that activity. But I think you're right in saying that if people are in a position where they have a compulsion and addiction to gamble, then it may be more likely that they become involved in criminal activities to feed that addiction. And that's certainly very unfortunate for them, for their families, and for other people who are affected, obviously.
It's been well known for a number of years, the effects of problem gambling, and that's where Anglicare, that's the sector that Anglicare works in. But Professor Mangan is a professor of economics, and he's looked at this purely on an economic grounds. And what he's found, as I said, apart from that $130 million that could be spent in other areas, he's found that the premise that the state government rely on taxation from poker machine is actually a myth because it's not that big a part of the economy.
Oh, absolutely. It's a really common one, and I think the reason people often have this misunderstanding is that in other states of Australia, that's the case. So if you go to the mainland and you're in New South Wales or Victoria or Queensland, the state governments there rely on poker machine taxes for 10 to 15% of their revenue. That's huge. Very difficult for them to walk away from that. Here in Tasmania, that's not the case at all. Our state government revenue is less than 1% comes from poker machines, and only half of that comes from the ones that are in pubs and clubs. So what we have to remember is that here in this state, we are in the best position to make a good decision for our future on poker machines.
Before it becomes too late.
We can take them out of pubs and clubs, and we won't go broke as a state. In fact, what Professor Mangan's report shows is that we'll do better economically as a state. We'll have more jobs, and our economy will thrive.
Well, as you say, it's not going to hurt the economy, and if we just take them out of the pubs and put them back into the casinos, even that's got to be a benefit, doesn't it?
Look, I think what anyone would reasonably assume is that when they're placed in your local community, and we know that there's certain communities that have many, many venues, and those tend to be communities that are lower socioeconomic communities. So if poker machines are in a pub or club and you have to go past them every day to drop your kids at school, to get to your job, to go to the doctor, to do your shopping, they're very hard to avoid. And if you're somebody who has a problem or is likely to develop a problem, then that's very tricky for you. So that accessibility, I think, is a real factor. We're suggesting that if you put them back into casinos, then that's an environment in which they belong. It's an environment where you can put better protections in place around them, and where people who really want to gamble and engage in that activity can go and do it. It's still available to them, but it's just more contained and less dangerous.
Yeah, I think that's a common sense approach rather than banning them altogether. And I think a lot of people think, oh, we'll ban them, and like you say, the myth is there that it's going to hurt the state government, it's going to hurt the economy, and we've seen today that it won't. So I think that's probably the most sensible approach. Look, I've got to say, Meg, thanks for your time on it today. I really appreciate that. It's a very interesting report, and I'm sure a lot of people will sit up and take notice of that. And the biggest thing it's done is got rid of that myth that we don't need to rely on poker machines.
That's exactly right. I think that this process with the parliamentary committee is allowing these sorts of things to be cleared up. It's putting good evidence out there into the public domain, and I think in the past we haven't had that. And I think that's a really good way to make sure that the community understands what's going to be a really positive way forward on this issue. And let's hope that the state government and other leaders pick that up and run with it.
Awesome, Meg. Thanks for your time this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.